Well, welcome to the first ever Brent and the Boys podcast.
Let's go.
I knew I was being watched, so I didn't show up.
Man, I didn't even know you existed.
Oh, that's not true.
All I knew is that maybe I like this guy. The next thing I know, I'm sitting at Starbucks. He's like, we all deal with stuff, and tomorrow's problems are going to be different than today's problems, but you're still going to have problems,
right?
And you're still going to have to make a choice. Am I going to turn to God, or am I going to turn to reacting out of my flesh and
Right.
on all those kinds of things? And
Taylor Swift taking over my football Sunday is really ruining my day, if I'm being honest with you. I don't watch football to watch Taylor Swift, you know what I mean?
Do you have any thoughts on that?
spiritual abomination.
Oh, there it is. Spiritual abomination. We need to cut this. This is not good. Start it over.
Well, welcome back to Brent and the Boys, Season 2, uploading
Finally.
right now. And man, we are so excited that you're here with us today. My name is Rob. I am one of the boys. And then today I'm joined by the other boy, super producer, Garrison Strahan.
Super producer.
And then, of course, you know, we're all here for the man, the myth, the legend,
That's right.
Pastor Brent Sparks.
Yes.
There he
Yes.
is.
And so Brent and
he
the
is.
Boys is back. And so, man, we're glad that you're here with us. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, click the like button, follow us as well. And man, subscribe to the channel. We would love for you to stay updated because we're going to continue to do these moving forward. And man, if you have followed us before or you've watched one of these, you know we start every one of these with one of our favorite segment.
Absolutely.
Hot takes, everybody. And so
the only reason we're here.
That's the only reason I'm here. You guys know.
I'm here to give spiritual food.
Yes, I live for this moment,
Yeah.
and our church reminds me every week that I
Because you're
have
not spiritual.
made some happy and disappointed many. So,
It's part of it.
season 2, here we go. What could go wrong? But we're going to jump into it today, and like we say every time, man, if you have a hot take, we do take requests, and so we would love to hear your hot takes if you have some, and so you can do it in the chat. You can send us a message. We will read that, and if it's good enough, we will add it to the list of potential questions. And so we're going to jump into today's, and so we're going to start off with this one. I like this one. I was looking through some things, and this was one that I thought was good. And so would the world be a better place if everyone had to wear a mood ring that changed color based on how they were feeling in the moment? Would that make things better? Think about...
So like an actual mood ring, not one that you waste $50 on.
No. That didn't have to be a ring. But if you had something on you at all times that gave everyone a heads up of where you were at emotionally, is that going to make things better or worse?
You know, I think it depends on who you are or who you're around. Because like Kobe, who was supposed to join us today, if he sees that you're in a bad mood, he's just going to egg it on. He's going to continue to push you further and further. Now, for others, like my wife, bro, that's her dream society. Are you kidding me? She gets to show people without telling people, hey, I'm pissed off. Leave me alone.
That's right. Stay away from me.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
I think it comes down to how good of a liar are you. Because, like, if you're... liar may be too extreme. I just offended somebody.
This is
season
a
2.
Christian show. We promote lying.
But if you've gotten good at, like, masking or, like, in a maybe even a healthy way, like, I grew up with a family that even if you were down, like, fake it till you make it. You go do your job, and no one should be able to tell the difference. And so I think I've learned that trait a little bit, and I don't wear my emotions on my sleeve as much. But on the flip side, I think it would help if I knew I was walking into a meeting and certain people were in a bad mood. That'd be nice.
I'm never in a bad mood, though.
No, not at all. Not
If
at all.
I am, you're not going to know it. Well, maybe sometimes, but not very often.
So another one that I liked and I thought would be good. Would it be more embarrassing to have your social media post from a decade ago resurface?
Oh, God.
So everything you posted 10, 15 years ago, which I've gone through and had to delete a lot of stuff, especially once you start ministry. If you grew up, you're our age, 10 years ago is a wild time on social media.
Yeah, we were talking about this morning. Our Facebook memories that pop up from 10, 12, 13 years ago. Yeah, no, they need to stay in the memory bank.
Yeah, those do not need to go public. And so would it be more embarrassing for that to happen or for an old crush to show up and tell all yours what you did to, like, get their attention when you were in high school? What would be worse?
Or college.
Or college.
Speaking of old crushes, can I tell the story, boys?
That's a boss question. Let's see his mood ring. What's it saying?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's all I'm saying.
No, I think for me, I think even though I know it was probably cheesy, I would rather an old crush show up and tell embarrassing Rob stories than old social media posts pop up.
I think that's a safe answer.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I have any posts that'll get me canceled, but I'm towing the line. You know what I mean? You know?
That's good to hear. Good to hear. Yeah, I don't know what was posted 10 years ago because people have been posting for me for 10 years, so I don't have a clue what was posted. So, and I did have an old crush show up recently. So.
Which one was worse? That's hilarious. That's so funny. All right, and last but not least, before we jump into it today, we just started college football season. You have three dedicated fans to three major football programs, and so I feel like,
season.
I mean, it's quarterback looks good, but we got to talk a little football. And so, how we feeling? The beginning of the season has started. It's funny because it's just far enough in that you can feel a certain type of way about your team, but not far enough in that you can actually know. Mm-hmm. And so, how we feel?
I mean, I knew before the season even started, feeling fantastic. This is a fact of life. Listen, we just smashed USF last week, 42-16, right? I mean, that game was never in doubt. So we're national championship or bust. Jalen Milroe is going to win the Heisman. I mean, Bama's back, baby. The standard never left.
Same thing to the Sooners.
Tide.
Sooners never left. They never went anywhere. We beat Houston 16-12. So, I mean, what more could you think other than Heisman National Championship, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly where we're headed. We were amazing Saturday.
You looked
amazing.
really good.
Yeah, thank you. And we feel really good about it. Actually, we're very confident. Very confident. Yes.
I mean, I reserve the right to.
Of course,
to
you
talk
always reserve the right
until October 13th, I believe is the date.
Because he knows no matter how bad Oklahoma is, we can still beat Texas.
That game causes me some nightmares.
And we are bad. We are bad, but we can still beat Texas.
That being said, 31-12 in the big house. Hook 'em, baby. That was a nice moment. 2 years back to back. Week 2, Texas might peak in week 2 under Steve Sarkisian because Alabama last year. Michigan this year, it's.
Is that what you want though, to peak in week 2?
That's what we want.
Texas' standard.
That's Texas standard. Big push and then fall off.
I mean, I'll just say this.
He knows I'm telling the truth. You just got to survive the push and then it's over.
Most recent Big 12 champ, most recent national champ. But I digress. We'll.
I got some stats for you since 2000.
I'm feeling good. I'm not drinking Kool-Aid, but if it was, I'd be a little drunk on it. That's all I'm saying.
Hey.
Because the Texas Kool-Aid tastes good right
Texas
now.
We have to
back,
admittedly say Texas has got a good team this year. I mean, you have to admit that.
Some would argue the new Alabama. Some
now that's come on.
Some would. I wouldn't.
The new Alabama. Wow.
I mean, I think we're more Alabama than Alabama's Alabama.
Well, right now.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Kalen
maybe.
DeBoer has those boys on a mission.
He does.
We're out to prove something this season.
That fumble made it 21-16 at the goal line was.
Look, we knew that USF needed help, right? We're already paying them, so we just want to make it a game.
That's how we felt about Houston.
Yeah,
Let's go play the worst game we possibly can just to make them feel good while we get $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. The same thing with Tulane this weekekend.
Absolutely.
And Tulane's absolutely going to destroy us, but we're going to give them a lot of money to do
Tulane
that.
actually isn't too bad.
They're a great team, actually. Yeah, so we're kind of in trouble, but we're going to pay them to do it.
Exactly.
Well, it's our favorite time of the year, man. We love football season. We love all of the things that come with the fall, and one of them for us, and I thought it'd be a good place to kind of kick off our talk today would is that in the fall we start our small group semester, and if you're in our church, great. But even if you're not, we're starting off in our small groups, and we're going through the book of Romans. And I thought basically week 1 of our small groups and week 2 of our small groups covered chapter 1 of Romans. And so as this episode airs, we will be discussing the first part of the second chapter of Romans. And I just thought it'd be a great place to kind of start a discussion and just talk a little bit about what Romans is talking about, but also just talk about the idea of the concept and the major verse that I know all of our small groups here at the church. But even if you're not, Romans 1:16 talks about, I am not ashamed of the power of the gospel. And man, I just want to talk about that and what that can mean in our lives, but also the impact that it can make as we step into what the idea of living out the gospel in our lives can do for us. And so just to kick us off, Garrison, I know had a small group last week, and how you guys talked about that verse.
10th grade boys, baby.
10th
Shout
grade
out.
boys.
Dear
I love
God,
it.
baby.
And so, man, just start us off and kind of thoughts on that verse and the whole idea of maybe the start of Romans.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it's really cool to be a small group leader of 10th grade boys. Sometimes, not all the time. Right now, it's a great semester. We have a great group of boys. But it's really cool to hear what that verse means. You know, this past week we were in Romans 1, and so, you know, every single one of our boys chose that for their Hear Journal, of course. Mm-hmm. And so it's really cool to see what that means to them at this point in their life. You know, they're in a really pivotal point in their life where they're experiencing things that, quite honestly, we've never experienced, you know. And so this verse really takes on a whole new meaning for them of, hey, I have to be unashamed of the gospel with where I'm at. If not, I know my friends, quite honestly, around me, they're going to go to hell. You know what I mean? And so it's just really cool to see how they're adapting that verse into their everyday life, because these boys have caught the vision of, man, if I don't do something about it, who will? You know, there's a kid in our youth group, we're talking about him at lunch, who made a shirt recently. Mm-hmm. You know, why not me, is I believe what it says, right? Mm-hmm. And even Friday night at PNG's football game, there was a whole group of boys walking around with shirts that said, why not me?
Yeah.
And so they're just adopting that right now in this season. It's such a cool thing to see. To be honest, I wish I would have had that boldness that they have at their age.
Yeah.
You know, I waited so long to, quite honestly, accept the calling that God had on my life to live out that verse. I just wish, you know, looking back on it, it's weird to think about, where would I be now? Would I still be here, you know? Or what all could I have accomplished in those few years where I just kind of was lukewarm, quite honestly, you know? Yeah. So it's just really cool to see those 10th grade boys really living out that verse in their everyday life, you know?
Boss, thoughts on it, on not just obviously Romans, more just like the idea of the gospel and how that impacts not only giving our life to Jesus, but obviously what Paul's really addressing is to the church, mm-hmm. to those who have already experienced the salvation power of the gospel, mm-hmm. how that transforms our lives.
Well, I think it's a sign of whether God's really changed you or not, mm-hmm. if I'm honest with you, because if he's really changed your life, then you want everybody to know it, mm-hmm. you know, and you see a lot of people, and again, you know, we do it at our church every week, so I'm not against this, but a lot of people just pray a prayer, and it's not that they may not mean it in the moment, but they're really not praying it as in the sense that I'm going to change my life. I'm just praying this because I want to be safe. I don't want to go to hell, mm-hmm. you know, whatever the case may be, but I still want to live the way I want to live. And then they still have, if you want to, what we call that man-pleasing spirit, where you go out, you're more concerned about what people think about you than you are anything. And Paul, of course, when he wrote this, you got to realize he's right in the middle of Rome, you know, I mean, where Caesar, you know, has declared himself the one true God, basically, God, right. You know, and he's declaring himself and everything that he does, the good news, you know, and all these kinds of things. And so Paul really is kind of writing to what, you know, Caesar has kind of declared about himself, you know, and Paul is saying, look, you know, I just want you to know there is one true God. His name is Jesus. And I'm not ashamed to tell you about this gospel, this good news that I found, that Jesus died. He resurrected from the dead. He can change your life. He changed my life. And I think it really is a sign for all of us that, you know, God's radically changed me. I'm willing to tell you, I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed about it. I'm not ashamed in front of this person or that person. And so think what you want to think about me. God has changed me. And that's, I think, comes really, we talked a little bit actually about Sunday. It's really the root issue, I think, of where we are as the church in general. People want God, they love God, they experience God, but they care more about what people think about them than they do their souls, if you will, because they don't want to witness to them. They don't want to tell them about what they found, because people are going to think they're radical. They're going to think they're crazy. They're going to think all these things. And of course, in that culture, the culture that we live in, that's what you're going to experience from some people. They don't want the ridicule of that. So I'm just going to keep my faith private is what I'm going to do, because that's safe for me. And I don't deal with any issues, you know, and I don't mess with anybody. They can believe what they want to believe, instead of caring enough to say, you know what, I don't care what you think about me. I'm still going to tell you what Jesus has done for me. And I can do that in a way that doesn't make me look crazy. I can do that in a way that's not offensive to you. I can just share with you what Jesus has done. And if you want that, great. If you don't, that's your choice. But at least I'm giving you the opportunity, because I'm not ashamed of what God has done in my life.
Right? You know, one really cool thing this past week, my wife also, she has 10th grade girls. And they went through the same thing, Book of Romans, chapter 1. And one of the girls, I'm not going to call her out, but her prayer at the end of the night was, you know, I've lived my entire life as a Christian. I've been saved. Every Sunday I ask God, God, forgive me of my sins. But she said, I've done that every Sunday because I've wanted to save myself. And she said, I want you guys to pray for me that I not only live this out so I can save myself, but I want this to be my verse to go and save others. She said, I've been worried about myself and my salvation, but now I want to worry about other salvation. Because if I'm not, then what's the point of doing this in the first place?
We're to freely give what we have freely received, right? And so we just got to make sure that we care enough about the people around us, that we care so much, I don't care what you think about me. I'm going to take this risk of you thinking that I am weird, you thinking that I'm crazy, I'm fanatical. I'm going to take the risk because I'm more concerned about your soul and where you're going, whether you're going to heaven or hell, more than I am concerned about what you think about me, you know? And quite honestly, probably the vast majority of the time, you're not necessarily going to get criticized or ridiculed, but there's going to be those times. And even in those times, people don't want to take those chances because, you know, they don't want people to think certain things about them. We've got to get past all that stuff. And I think it's one of the things that Paul is saying. I don't care what you think. I'm going to tell you about Jesus.
Yeah. I love my favorite part of the beginning of chapter 1. 16 is obviously the famous verse. It's the one that most people highlight, but actually 17 is the one that has really stuck out to me as I've read it and studied it. Because he says, for in the gospel, so I'm not ashamed of it, he says in 16, but then he says why he's not ashamed of it is because wrapped in the gospel is the righteousness of God that's revealed. A righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as is written, the righteous will live by faith. And then this idea, and I love this idea that wrapped in this idea of the gospel is righteousness, and righteousness means to be made right. And man, not better than others, not good enough, but to be right. Or right with God, and in that notion is this idea that it's not just fire insurance from hell, right? It's a here and a now that the gospel transforms our lives now and turns us into the righteousness of God. And man, we talk about this a lot here at Encounter, but maybe you're watching and you don't listen or go to Encounter. Man, one of the things we talk about all the time is that when it comes to the power of the gospel, that the righteousness of God gives us the ability to learn to say no, right? That we don't have to be what we used to be. We don't have to do that. And so I think not only is Paul saying, man, I want to reach as many people as possible and change people's lives, but also it gives me the ability to be made righteous and to be in right standing with God. And that's going to change how we live. And so I just wanted to open up the floor a little bit and discuss that. Like, what is it, not just what does it mean for the gospel to change our lives, but truly when I think through the idea of righteousness, how can we learn to live a righteous life?
Well, we've been made the righteousness of God. So when Jesus comes into your life, you're made righteous, not because of your righteousness, but His, right? So what does that really mean? That means that every time God looks at you, He sees Jesus, right? So He's not looking at all the faults that Brent has, and Brent has plenty, right? But instead he looks at the sacrifice of his son Jesus. So when he looks at me, he sees that sacrifice, which makes me righteous in his eyes. It makes me worthy in his eyes of all the promises of God, because of what Jesus did. And I've accepted that sacrifice. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died on a cross for my sins, that he got up from the grave and he's alive today. I believe that with everything that's within me. And so because of that, and I've accepted that, well, that means now everything that God has for me, every promise of the Bible belongs to me. Why? I've accepted the sacrifice of Jesus, and I have been made the righteousness of God through that sacrifice. And so that qualifies me as an heir. Yep. Right? I'm an heir of Christ now. That means whatever Jesus gets, I get. Because I've been promoted to that level that's what's so amazing about this. We've all been promoted to that level. We are sons of God, just like Jesus is a son of God. We are sons of God and daughters of God if we accept Christ. And he sees us that way, and it opens up this life of abundance that God has for us in every possible way, from peace to joy to strength to healing to victory to authority to prosperity, whatever you want to put. It's a life of abundance that God has for us, that the righteousness of God provides for us because we've accepted the sacrifice of Jesus in our lives. Yeah. So important. Yeah.
I love the way it ends right there. I believe Paul's quoting Habakkuk here at the very end of that verse right there, where he says the righteous shall live by faith. And I love that it includes that in there, that you have to live by faith righteously. So it's one thing to live righteously in the world standards, because righteousness is just morally right. Yep. And morals, us as Christians, obviously we have a moral compass. We believe that there's only one set of truths, but if you look at the world, there's so many different sets of truths. Yep. So morality can mean one thing to us, but something else to somebody else down the street. But I love that he says that you have to be righteous through faith, because it's one thing to just do good things, right, to be considered righteous. But if you're not doing good things through faith and for faith, then you're just a selfish person. Yep. I mean, just quite honestly, and you're trying to manipulate people into thinking, man, look at what he's doing. Yeah. And you're dragging people with you instead of carrying people with you to the cross. Yeah. Because quite honestly, I mean, it goes back to 16. If we're not carrying people with us to the cross, if we're not unashamed of the gospel, then we're dragging people away from the cross instead of pushing it to the cross. And so you have to be righteous, but you also have to do it in faith.
I love that. I was reading something and it was addressing this, and it was saying that one of the thoughts in there was that when it comes to the idea of righteousness, we struggle sometimes to take it serious because we live in a world, especially young people, and young, I would just quantify as maybe like 40 and below, right? Because you grew up in a social media era. Social media has kind of, my age and younger, and worse for the younger ages, but has molded and shaped. And what's come with that is a byproduct is heavy on the comparison. Yeah. You're using social media as a way to compare, am I successful? Am I good enough? Do I get enough likes? Blah, 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 blah. And so I say all that to say that when it comes to spirituality, we struggle with righteousness sometimes because we base our spirituality on other people's badness or goodness. And I'm a good person because someone else is a worse person. And the idea of this, I think, when it comes to righteousness is like you said, we've been made right because of him, nothing to do with us. And I think when we get into that comparison mentality, one thing I read said it this way, like, whether you're a good sinner or a bad sinner, you're still a sinner. Yeah. And what Paul's trying to get you to understand is if you'll embrace the righteousness of God, you'll live differently. Yep. You'll act differently. And I think it's interesting. And this is, like I said, I almost picture this as if you're listening, you could literally just open your Bible and kind of follow along with this. We're not going verse by verse, but kind of theme by theme through this. So he talks about the gospel and that the gospel embraces righteousness. And then the rest of chapter 1, he basically goes in and it says, if you don't embrace the gospel, your life's going to look a little differently, and you're going to act differently. And I think it's interesting because it goes through and it starts saying all of these things. Then the whole chapter ends with this list of sins that the world will look like if you don't embrace the power of the gospel and the righteousness that comes with it. And so when it comes to this, and I'm not trying to necessarily hone in and just beat everybody over the head if you do these things at the end of Romans, but more, I just want to open the discussion and say, when it comes to how we act and how we live, how can we fall into this idea of saying, I'm trying, because I think there's a lot of people out there that go, I'm trying to be changed by the power of the gospel, but I'm still in the process of growing. And I'm not, I still screw up a lot. how can we speak to them, and what would you say to the person listening who goes, I'm trying to be transformed, but I'm still in progress. I'm a work in progress. And some of the things listed in Romans, I may find myself still struggling with or doing, but I don't want that to be my reality. What would you say to that person that goes, I'm trying to live this, but I'm still struggling?
Well, first thing I would say is don't give up. Right? I mean, we've all found ourselves in those moments where we feel like we're in the vicious cycle of, I want to be free, I'm bound up. I want to be free, I'm bound up. I want to be free, I'm bound up. You know, and it's just this vicious cycle sometimes that we find ourselves in. I found myself there before too. But the thing about it is that you just don't give up. You always keep having the desire, God, I want to change. And God, I need you to help me change. But here's the thing. It really is true. And again, you guys hear me harp on it all the time. But if you truly want to change whatever it is that, that you're dealing with, then you've got to focus on, okay, I've got to start focusing on the things of God and not what it is, the things that are causing me to do this or think this way, right? So again, what you watch, what you look at, what you click on, what you read, what you listen to matters because if you're doing things that are, if you're listening, clicking on all those kind of things that are going to satisfy your flesh, well, guess what you're going to do? You're going to act out in your flesh. You're going to act out that way. And that thing that you're struggling with, you're constantly feeding it. And so your mind is going there. And because every sin starts where? It starts in your mind first. It isn't just something you actually think about it before you do it. There's nothing that you're going to sin. There's no sin that you commit that you don't think about first before you do it. Well, if that's the case, then what put that thought there? What caused that thought to get there? And you've got to begin to eliminate those things in your life to be able to do that. So, if it's, let's just say some guy's got a problem with pornography. Well, then what am I going to do? I've got to make sure I don't pick up the magazine. I got to make sure I don't click on the video. I've got to make sure that I'm accountable to somebody. Say, hey, I need you to watch what I'm doing here. So that you do what? You stay away from that so that the thoughts don't get there, so that you don't start acting out on things that are going to destroy your life. And it's that way with everything. So what do I got to do? I've got to put my mind on the things of God. And people say, well, I don't want to do that. Well, then you don't want to be free. Yep. And I really mean that, because if you truly want to be free of these things that are keeping you down, that are keeping you away from living the life that you say you want to live, and I believe that you want to live, then you've got to change some of the choices that you're making and some of the things that are getting you to that point, and start filling yourself again with the things of God. So I'm going to surround myself with the people of God. I'm going to get in a small group. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to worship, and I'm not going to watch some of these shows that I've been watching or listening to some of this, whatever it is that's causing that. I'm going to separate myself from all that stuff so that I can keep my mind, because when you renew your mind, because it's a mind issue. That's what it is. That's why Romans 12 is so important. You got to renew your mind. I say this to the church all the time. Once you give your life to Christ, the rest of your Christian life is renewing your mind and training your soul and your body to follow the Spirit of God that's on the inside of you.
Yeah.
Right? And we've got to do that by, it takes discipline. All these things I talked about, making these choices are the disciplined choices and thoughts that we have to have in order to live this victorious life we're talking about.
And I think what you just said is so important in this conversation. And Paul says some really tough stuff in the end of this chapter. But one of the ones that I think sticks out the most to me is kind of verse 21 through 23. And he paints the picture that basically, if you won't discipline yourself, and if you won't, and I think just like that cycle says, and Pastor Brent says, if we can get that flowing in the right direction, the opposite is true. If we don't, and we let our flesh dictate what we want and how we live, and if we won't discipline ourselves that way, Paul paints the picture that basically says that if we choose to put our flesh first, God will take his hand and say, fine, you can live that way. He will allow us to. And I think that's a really scary place to be, because I think in the midst of that, even though God is desperately always trying to draw us back, he says, if you want to do life without me, I will let you. And I mean, I think that's just a warning that in this chapter that it gives, is that, like, if you're in progress, like Pastor Brent said, don't give up. Why? Because if you won't give up and you'll keep working this, God will show up every day and meet you there. And he'll give, and I really believe the power of God will supernaturally fall in your life and help you live the right way, but you've got to put effort to it.
And I think too, in that chapter, the verse down in there that where Paul is talking about homosexuality and all those things. And that's kind of the verse everybody kind of harps on and pulls out. And there's no question, obviously, that is a sinful action. There's no question about that. The Bible is very clear. But that I don't think that Paul's purpose here is to just pick on that particular thing. I think really what Paul's purpose is by listing that and all these other sins in here is he's trying to help us understand this is what the heart of humanity is without Jesus. And this is where you go when you don't choose Jesus. These are the paths that you're going to go down. When you fill yourself with all this other stuff. And let me just tell you, we think and I do understand our culture is messed up, but our culture is not near as messed up with what Paul was in.
No.
Biblical culture, that was messed up culture. I mean, those guys were, they were worshiping all kinds of things from pieces of metal to pieces of wood, all kinds of things, all kinds of sexual things going on. It was in my opinion.
The town of Corinth sounds like Vegas on steroids.
Dude, I'm telling you.
You read it in its context.
And it's all happening in public.
It's Vegas on steroids.
It's nothing behind the scenes. This is all happening out here in front. And so all of these things that he's writing to, they're actually seeing happen, right? And so it's not like he's trying to pick on certain things. All he's trying to say is that when you delve yourself over to your flesh, when you say I'm going to do life without God, this is what life without God looks like. That's what he's trying to say. This is what life without God looks like, and it's going to take you down the path of destruction. And it's going to destroy you. You must have God. You've got to choose God in your life so that your life doesn't go down this path because this is the picture that you're going to find yourself in.
The Bible tells us we all fall short. It's human nature, like you just said. And I think about Peter, right? And it's probably because I just preached on him a couple weeks ago, right? But
humble brag.
The difference between Peter and Judas, right? They both sinned, right? They both betrayed God. They both betrayed Jesus, right? But the difference in between the two is the fact that Peter repented and Judas regretted. Right? And that's where people get so caught up in their own sin is they just start to beat themselves up.
They're bogged down in their own regret.
Exactly.
Right.
What's the point of me continuing to try? I'm just going to fail again. Yeah, you are going to fail again. But that's where the grace of God comes in. The Bible tells us, Jesus tells them, how many times should you forgive your neighbor? Right? 7 times? 70 times 7. Right? Because Jesus is just going to continue to forgive, grace, because that's what he did for us on the cross. So many times people get bogged down in their own regret when Jesus is telling you, no, lean not on your own understanding. Trust in me with everything. It's like Proverbs says, look, I'm here to carry that shame and that burden with you. And because I've already washed it all away.
Yeah. This is going back to the some of the body, soul, spirit stuff that we've taught here at Encounter a lot throughout the years, but anytime your body is making the decisions for your life, anytime your flesh is winning the war and it's not submitting to the Spirit of God on the inside of you, what's happening is idol worship. That's why the first command, I really believe, is that you shall have no other God before me. That God's expectation was always that he would be first. And I'm just telling you, if your body, and like Pastor Brent said, when you have an idol in your life, it's going to start to manifest itself through the things in the end of Romans. It's the fall of humanity, and this is what life looks like apart from God. And let me just tell you, no matter how good, and this is where that comparison trap is dangerous, no matter how good you think you might be, if you're the standard of goodness in your life, there's going to be an idol worship happening that isn't going to be worshiping God. And it's going to be pleasing yourself. And like Pastor Brent said, it's going to lead to the path of destruction. I think that's the warning in all of, really, the whole book of Romans is leading to. But man, if you'll embrace the power of the gospel, it'll change you. And in that, I think that's the exciting part. And that's why around here we say this. Maybe you're watching today and you don't go to Encounter and you've never heard us say this before. But man, a challenge we give every person in our church every Sunday is if you'll give us 1 year of your life, if you'll commit, find a local church, go all in and let the power of the gospel begin to transform you every day for 1 year. I'm just telling you, you'll look up a year from now and look different because the gospel never leaves you the way it found you.
That's right.
And that's, I think, the hope of the gospel is that the righteousness of God begins to show up. And so in the midst of that, if someone is finding themselves, and I think, like I said, they're sitting here going, I'm screwed up right now. Obviously, we said like regret versus repentance. Pastor Brent, would you just speak a little bit to somebody who's maybe in the midst of some mess right now? What does repentance mean? How does it look? How can they get out of this mess that they found themselves in?
Well, you have to remember it's a process. You know, I mean, obviously, when you repent, you're forgiven. I mean, God's going to forgive you immediately. But there's still things that are you're going to have to make choices. You're still going to have to make right choices. And you're going to have to get in that process. You know, it really is, you know, of course, when you give your life to Christ, you enter into what is called the process of sanctification. So what does that mean? That means God just begins to expose on the inside of you, which is a good thing, by the way. He begins to expose on the inside of you the things that are there that are contradictory, if you will, to his word, that are contradictory to the relationship that he wants to have with you. So he'll begin to deal with those things individually. And that list is different for all of us, right? He'll deal with all of us differently. But what the purpose of that is to peel that stuff off of your life so that you can get closer to him, right? Because the closer you get to him, the more you're going to have to shed off, right? On that side of your flesh and that sort of thing. And so that process really is trying to help you to shed the fleshly desires that we all have. And every one of us are still in that process of sanctification. That's not going to stop, by the way, until Jesus comes back. Every one of us are dealing with that. But what you've got to do is you've got to be willing to get in the process. You got to be willing to make the decisions. You got to understand that even when you, just like Garrison said a while ago, you're going to fall short. That's what the Bible says. We all fall short of the glory of God. We all sin and fall short. And so when that happens, you just get back up, right? We just get back up and move on, because here's what you've got to remember. And I'm not saying you shouldn't acknowledge sin in your life. Don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. But I think you do need to understand, when you give your life to Christ and you ask God to forgive you, he forgives you of everything in your past. He forgives you of everything in your present. He forgives you of everything in your future, right? He's not going to come back 3 weeks from now and die on the cross again because you committed some sin. It's already forgiven. Now, is it important for you to acknowledge that? It is important, I think, for you to acknowledge, God, I blew this. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your forgiveness. But what they were talking about a while ago goes back to, I think it's Romans chapter 8. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, right? So what the enemy is going to try to do when you mess up, what's the first thing? He wants you to feel condemned. He wants you to feel guilty. I'm never going to get out of this. I'm never going to get free of this. That's what the enemy wants you to think, because if he gets you thinking that way, then he gets you down. But if you recognize, you know what? I blew it, but God's already forgiven me of this. He's already forgotten this. I don't have to be condemned about this. I don't have to be guilty about this because of what Jesus has done for me. So that means I can still keep my head high. I can still keep a smile on my face. I can still move forward even though I messed up, because I'm in this process of becoming what it is that God wants me to become. And he's going to change my life because I'm willing to stay here and not get down and beat myself up over every bad decision that I make, because Jesus is the Lord of my life, right?
Garrison, I think somebody who obviously does lead small groups and with a younger audience, right? And I think that's a unique place where you have people who are actually trying. And here's an interesting thing about our church is a lot of our youth. There's a big percentage of our youth group who they are the only people in their family who go to church. And so, man, as somebody who deals with that, how do you, what would you say to the young person listening that's like, hey, I'm trying, man. I don't have an example for what this looks like, but I've given my life to Jesus. I'm trying to get it right, but I'm still in progress. How do you encourage your youth kids on a regular basis that are going through that?
It's simple. It's just keep trying.
Keep
trying. Don't stop. Just because you messed up doesn't mean that you have to stop. Just keep going, keep trying. And eventually you might not see fruit right now, right? You might not see fruit 10 years from now, but you've planted a seed at some point within now and those 10 years where you will see fruit eventually, right? It might not be on this side of eternity with your friends around you, right? But you planted a seed at some point if you keep trying. And it's literally that simple. There's a kid in my small group right now whose parents don't come to church, right? He's the only one, but he's here every Sunday. He's here every Wednesday. He serves faithfully, and life is hard for him. He's very open and honest about that. But the one thing that I love about him is he keeps going. He doesn't stop, even whenever, quite honestly, his parents ridicule him about it, right? Why are you still going? Because this is what I have to do. This is what I need to do. He keeps trying. And so it's literally that simple. I don't think there's a magic potion or a magic spell It's just pick yourself up
That's it.
and keep going.
Love
It's
it.
literally that simple.
It's just, and it's the same with the Bible. I don't understand it. Keep reading.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? Keep reading, because there's going to come the time where you are going to understand.
Yep.
You know, and that very passage that you thought you would never get, all of a sudden one day the Holy Spirit's going to cause something to jump off of that page, out of that verse, that you're going to see. Why? Because you didn't give up. Even though you didn't understand it the first time, you didn't understand it the 15th time you read it. But when you got to the 16th time, all of a sudden something came alive on the inside of you because you didn't give up.
Yep.
You kept reading and you kept going back to the Word, even when you don't get everything about it. And I think that's what's so important, you know, about our lives with God. I mean, we're never going to understand everything about Him, but we just got to make sure that every day we are still taking the step. I'm taking the step. I'm taking the step. I'm moving forward. I'm gonna be with God. I'm gonna read my Bible. I'm not gonna be condemned because I didn't read it yesterday. So what? I'm gonna get up today and I'm gonna do what I'm supposed to do today, right? And I think so many times people get so caught in what they didn't do rather than stepping into what you just should do, right? And so we've got to get out of that mentality, because that's where condemnation and guilt come from. When you live in this what I didn't do mentality, you're going to feel guilty and condemned. But if you'll just get out of that and say, you know what, I forget about yesterday. I can't change that, but I can change right now. So I'm going to make the choice right now to do what's right.
Yep.
I love that. I think one last question or big thought I kind of wanted to cover before we close is, and you kind of addressed this partly on Sunday, but Paul's writing to a group of Christians in a church, right? And part of what I think he's answering is people who are going, we live in this crazy society. How did we get here? And I think it, like I said, it may not be on the levels of a Rome or a Corinth, but I think we're living in an American society now that people, even especially the older generations, look and go, how in the world did we get here? Yep. What has happened to the world I grew up in? What has happened to the church age I grew up in, which we are kind of in a post-church age now, where it's not a guarantee that people are going to go to church or be quote unquote Christian, even by denomination, if you will, or by faith. And so in this world that people look up and do that, as Christians, where's the hope for the world we live in, and what can we do to actually say, I want to change the world, or I want to try to see the world improve? Not that it's going to go back to what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, but what's the hope for the church today in the midst of this crazy society?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked to at the very beginning, and that is, I'm not going to be ashamed of the gospel.
So good.
I think it's the biggest issue in the church.
Yep.
I really do. And I'm talking about for Christians. I think Christians are ashamed in this culture because this culture ridicules Christians.
Yeah.
Right? And again, when you go back to biblical times and biblical standards, it's nothing compared. I mean, Nero, who was the emperor at the time, or the Caesar at the time, when Paul is in it writing this, he's burning Christians.
Yeah.
You know, he's using them as lampposts. I mean, that's what the guy's doing. I mean, it was a messed up time, but yet those people were still standing for Jesus, even though they were being martyred. But yet here, all it is that we've got going on in America right now is somebody saying something negative about you. They're not killing you like they're doing in China, like they're doing in Iran and Afghanistan and all that. They're not killing you. All they're doing is saying something about you. And I'm talking about the church in general. We're having a hard time standing up with people saying bad stuff about us. What if they actually start persecuting us?
Right. Yep. Right.
What if actually physical persecution starts coming? What's going to happen? Right.
Yep.
And so you've got to learn to stand up for God and righteousness in the right way and in a loving way, but to freely give. You've got to freely give what you freely received. And to me, it really is the true sign for me when I'm kind of judging somebody. We're all judged by the fruit in our lives.
Yep.
And so I can tell you real quick when I get around somebody whether they've got a radical relationship with Jesus or not.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll talk about Jesus all the time, right? Everybody they know out there, they're posting stuff on social media. They run across anybody. I need to tell you about Jesus. I don't care what you think, and they'll get ridiculed. They don't care. They don't care what you say about them. Why? Because they're so transformed and they're so thankful for that grace and mercy and the forgiveness of God that they found that has radically changed their lives. They've got to tell everybody about it. And that's where we've all got to get back to. I thought about earlier something you said, especially I think it's in Revelation, where Jesus is talking to one of the churches, and he says this. He says, "You got to return to your first love.
Yeah.
You've got to get back here. Well, you got to get back to what? To that zealousness that you used to have, that excitement you used to have. Because what happens is people get in church, and it may be 6 months, 6 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, but all of a sudden it's dull and it's boring. And why is that? Because you're not talking about Jesus anymore. When you first gave your life to Christ, you're telling everybody. So it was exciting. Yes. But when you stop talking about Jesus to people outside the church, hear me. When you stop talking to people outside the church about Jesus, your Christian life becomes dull and boring.
So good. Yep.
Dull and boring.
So good.
Yeah. You want excitement? Start telling people about Jesus. You might get some criticism and ridicule, but you're going to get more fruit and you're going to get more victory from it than you are criticism and ridicule. If you'll just live this way, it'll change your life.
I think about when I think about the moments where after I've given my life to Jesus, the most invigorating, best moments where I feel like I've experienced the power of the gospel. Honestly, I love what you just said, because it wasn't on a stage. We all are pastors who hold a microphone at times and preach. It wasn't on a stage. It wasn't doing a salvation prayer at the end of a message. I think about when I was a young adult pastor 6 years ago, and there was a little girl who was a volleyball player at Lamar, and it was right before the end of the semester, before she went home for summer break. She'd been attending, and she was going through some things, and we said, "Hey, can we take you to dinner?" And we met at Jason's Deli, and right there we got to hear her story, and we said, "Hey, it sounds to me like you need to give your life to Jesus." And she gave her life to Jesus right there at a booth in Jason. And I think about that's the most amazing moment I've had in my life as a minister, as a pastor, and it wasn't on a stage. And I think to you can do that. There are people in your life who need you to just say, "Hey, can I invite you over for dinner? Can we take you to go grab coffee?" And you talk to them and you just go, "Hey, let me tell you what Jesus has done in my life." It'll change your perspective on life, and it'll change how you live your life if that becomes a normal practice. Garrison, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen this decline because we've become such a consumer society. Yeah. Right? We consume instead of produce.
So good.
And we're not called to consume, we're called to produce.
Exactly.
And so I think that's where such a big problem lies, is we think it's just the church's job to share the gospel.
Yeah.
It's not the church's job. The church is here to equip you.
Yep.
The church is here to equip the saints, but we're here to send you out, just like you preach Sunday. We're here to reach the lost, and if we're not reaching the lost, then we're not acting out the gospel.
Yeah, we're not doing what the church is supposed to do.
And that's why we see and where we see a decline. And so, like you said, I mean, personally, that's what we're called to do personally, right? We're not just called to invite people to church. That's a great step. Don't get me wrong, right? We're not just called to invite people to church, though. We're also called to share the gospel with them personally.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's I think that's a big deal, because I think people kind of cop out that way. Well, I'm just going to invite you to church, which is a good step. I would never criticize that, but you do have responsibility to share your testimony. We say it like this around here all the time: your story matters. What God has done in your life is unique, and you are a prophetic word to the people in your sphere of influence. That if God did this for you, He can do it for them. Right? If He set you free, He can set them free, and that's why it's so important. You've got to share your story with the people around you. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I'll say this to every pastor that might be watching this, it's the same thing for me. If we could motivate our people just to tell their stories outside of this church, let's just say we could motivate everybody in 1 week to go tell their story with somebody, of what Jesus had done in their life. If we could motivate them to do that, I'm telling you, our churches would double overnight, triple overnight, quadruple overnight. Why? Because those people's stories are going to affect somebody. They're going to give their life to Christ, and they're going to want to come to church.
Yeah, you don't need a platform to share your story.
You don't.
You just need a conversation.
That's all you need. Take somebody to lunch. Go get them a Coke, whatever the case may be. Let me tell you my story of what Jesus has done in my life. And it's baffling to me why people are so concerned about that. But I do understand just the human side, the fleshly side of, I don't want people to think I'm crazy. I'm a fanatic. I don't want them talking bad about me behind my back. Well, neither did Jesus, right? I mean, but look what, He didn't care. He did not care. And that's, I think, the whole point. Jesus is like, I didn't care what man thought. I got up here and I got on this cross and I died and I did all these things that I could have walked away from in a heartbeat. The Bible says He could have called legions of angels just like that to come rescue Him. But He chose not to do that because He loved all of us. Even when we were sinners, He died for us, right? And so we've got to be willing to say, okay, God, if you love me that much and you did that for me, then I'm willing to take the risk of somebody ridiculing me, criticizing me, to share my story with them so I can see their life change for Jesus.
So here's the challenge as we close today. if you're listening to this, I think God wants to speak to you right now and just say, who's the one?
Yeah.
There's somebody in your life that you're supposed to share your story with.
That's right.
And man, I mean, I think there's more than one, but it's got to start with one.
Yes.
And just like Garrison was talking about earlier, whether you've done it before, you've messed up before, it doesn't matter. There is somebody who your story is meant to impact. And so who is it? And I think there's people popping into your mind right now. Man, invite them over to dinner. Say, hey, can we go grab coffee? Can we hang out tomorrow? If you're in school, can we go to lunch? Sit at the same lunch table tomorrow. There are places and opportunities. Your job is to find out who's the one, and then look for that moment.
Exactly right.
Just tell them your story. Say, can I just tell you what God's done in my life? And I'm just telling you, it's going to open a door, and they're going to ask you some questions. You're going to get to share Jesus with them in that process.
Just
and
plant
so,
the seed.
man, thank you so much for joining us for Brent and the
You
boys.
bet.
We appreciate you, man. Any final thoughts, boys?
Love it. I'm glad we're back for season 2. Boomer.
Roll Tide, baby.
And hook them. Brent and the boys, man, follow the channel, watch the episode, tell your friends about it, and if you have any hot takes, submit them. We love you. We'll see you next time.